All right, everybody, good evening. We're meeting with Peter Frank, who I've known for a couple of decades, but nowhere near as well as I want. I'm pretty sure you've been based out of Southern California that whole time, and I've been in Chicago.
I think we may have met first when I was still in New York, because I moved out here in the end of '87.
And then you're probably right. So, all right, where were you? Give me some background, Peter. Where were you raised? Where did you go to high school, and how did you get involved in the arts, and how have you worn so many hats?
Let's see, that's a swelled head, that's how. I was born in Manhattan, grew up in the Jersey suburbs, and it was there at the age of 12 that, although I was already interested in music, I got interested in visual art, and in fact saw a direct connection to it. In 7th grade, I wanted to take a music class, but music was 8th grade, so 7th grade was visual art. So I said, what the hell, I'll make the best of it, it's better than shop. So then the teacher showed us Kandinsky and Miro and Klee, and I said, my God, I'm looking at what I've been listening to. And the whole thing just kind of fell in. My parents had been members of the Museum of Modern Art and had their catalogs around, and they'd take me to museums every so often. But, you know, at moments of boredom in the house, I'd try to pick up a catalog about Dubuffet or Gorky or assemblage, and stuff would catch my eye. But then when I related it to music, it all kind of came together and made sense. And I started following what the hot trends of the day, which were hard edge abstraction and pop art. Thereafter, I went to college at Columbia and majored in art history. I got a BA and an MA there. Started writing I started writing criticism even in high school. But I was the art critic for the Columbia Spectator, and then I was the first critic for the Soho Weekly News, and I wrote for the Village Voice late in the 70s. I was writing for the art magazine the whole time. Started curating as well towards the end of the 70s. And I was paying attention to Southern California as well as New York, in fact, to artwork from all over the country and the world. I worked with Documenta in 1977 and again in '87. And I've just done criticism and curation and teaching on both coasts and anywhere I could in between.
There was never an interest on your part in being an artist. You didn't take studio classes in college.
No. No, I dabbled a little bit in it junior high and high school. And recently, several artist friends of mine have said, really ought to be an artist because you ought to subject yourself to what you subject others to, which is a persuasive argument. But even though I have kind of a good idea of what kind of art I'd make, and in fact have exhibited like written works and performance proposals, you know, graphic scores, that kind of thing in exhibitions, and even shown photographs that I've taken with my BlackBerry. I'm not an artist first and foremost, nor have I been trained as such.
Would you say you were trained as an art critic?
Yeah, I was trained as an art historian, which I think is, and come from a family of writers, journalists, librarians, that kind of thing.
Do you have a purpose as a critic? Do you have a mission?
I'm motivated first and foremost by curiosity, and want to share what intrigues me with others. And I want to provide thereby as broad a knowledge and experience of artistic practice, contemporary and historical, as I can possibly serve to illuminate. serve to as I can possibly share with whatever readership and listenership I can attract.
That raises a question about how much connoisseurship should a critic have?
How much?
Yep.
Just the right amount.
How much?
Connoisseurship as an exercise in discretion is very important. In my case, I think it balances with historical knowledge and perhaps even personal enthusiasm. Not bias, but enthusiasm.
You don't feel like your critiques are speaking to the artist very much.
As much as
the viewer.
Well, the viewer, the primary viewers of art are artists. The first, and by primary I mean not the most important necessarily, but the first line.
Right.
And probably the first line I have to acknowledge as my audience are professionals, people who have a passion for art and thus make their living on that, exercising that passion. Those are my colleagues.
Is that who you write? When you write, is that who your audience is in your mind?
My audience is anybody who's interested, whether they exercise that interest professionally or exercise that interest personally. It could be the 14-year-old I used to be.
But not particularly the maker of the object or the exhibition that you're critiquing.
That's not my, well, when I'm writing, not when I'm writing a review.
Okay.
But when I'm writing a catalog essay, for instance, as opposed to a review, I have to keep the interests, the engagement, I should say, of the subject in mind. Not the dealer, but so much as the artist, him or herself. Invariably, the best thing anyone can say to me is, well, the best thing an artist can say to me is that I brought to attention aspects of the work that the artist, her or himself, was not aware of.
Right.
I consider my writing first and foremost a craft, and I take great care to write in a way that manifests a certain eloquence. Whether I do so or not, it's not up to me.
Right.
But I strive for that. Now, at the same time, I want that eloquence. I strive for that eloquence because that eloquence serves best my understanding of the work, and thus an understanding of the work. And it's that understanding of the work that my writing functions, my writing exists to provide. That's what people take there.
How is determined? How many publications do you write for presently?
I couldn't give you regularly. Oh, about half a dozen.
And did you choose them, or did they choose you, or how did the relationship come about?
By and large, they chose me. There are certain publications I'd like to be writing for, and had I time to reach out to them, I would. But I don't have time for them. Also, writing for publications is not my bread and butter. You don't
get to that in a minute. Let's not go quite there quite yet. When you do write for publications, who determines what you write about?
More me than them. More me than they. But depending on the publication, you know, it's a back and forth. They'll ask me for proposals. I mean, they will not have one, and they say, "How about this? How about that?" And if it appeals to me, or if it's then all or easy for me physically to go see the work, then I'll do it.
Do they pay you for your transportation very often?
Not often. Under those circumstances, I tend not to remember to ask for them, even when they urge me to. When I travel long distances, yes. Whether it's to do a catalog essay, curate a show, give a lecture, judge a show, or even write about a show for publication.
Are those things you just listed other things that you do often?
Yes.
Did that grow out of being an art critic?
Yes, because you don't make a living writing art criticism. You make a living being an art critic. In other words, exercising, demonstrating, and then exercising authority and expertise.
Let's talk about some examples.
When I'm asked to judge an exhibition, judge a juried exhibition, be the judge for a juried exhibition. That could happen here in Glendale, or it could happen up in north of Sacramento. I'm going up a few weeks to judge a show in Chico, California.
And what else do you do?
I lecture and teach. I write. For instance, this summer, I've been to Italy, and I went to Italy in order to write a catalog essay for an artist in a northern Italian town who will be having a retrospective there. While there, I went over to Venice to look at a Biennale and to write about it for Huffington Post. I then came back, and several days later I was in New Mexico opening a show that I co-curated with the David Richard Contemporary Gallery of LA painting in the 70s. It's the first of 4 exhibitions. That show, the reception for that show was timed to coincide with the Santa Fe Art Fair, at which I chaired a panel including several of the artists in the show, and we discussed issues relevant to that show, and the following day we did a walkthrough of the same show. Then next week I'll be going to New York to curate and open an exhibition of paintings by a friend of mine in Western Massachusetts. Then I come back and then go up to Chico to do the jury that show. Then I go over to the Bay Area to begin work on a show of an artist who worked in a French-born artist who worked in New York and in San Francisco, whose widow has organized a show that will open of his work will be up in New York in December. There's something else, but I'm forgetting one. Anyway, I do a lot of traveling, to do a lot of curating, to do a lot of lecturing, to do a lot of jurying, to do a lot of critical writing.
Tacky questions. Where does the majority of your money come from these art endeavors?
Probably the writing catalog essays and organizing exhibitions.
All right. Let's talk about the curating. You get paid a fee for that?
Yes, I do.
You get paid a percentage of sales ever?
Never.
Is the
obviously for public institutions there aren't such, and with commercial galleries, I never take a percentage of sales.
Do commercial galleries pay a higher percentage than non-commercial, or the other way around?
There's no set pattern, surprisingly enough. You'd expect commercial galleries to pay better than non-commercial, and if there's any pattern that exists, that probably is it. But I found that I've been paid very, very well by public spaces, depending on the funding that they've received for the particular project.
What's involved in curating a show for a public space? You're picking all the artists and the theme of the show, or not quite so much?
It depends. Usually, it's determining the theme of the exhibition and finding the artist there for it. Actually, that's the same with the commercial galleries.
How often do you use the same artist in more than once in a 2-year period?
Recently, I've been doing a series. As it happens, I've been doing a series of. I've been doing exhibitions, thematic exhibitions, small thematic exhibitions for relatively small commercial galleries. And over the last year or so, I've found that it's helpful to use 1 or 2 artists from the previous show in the next show, irrespective of where that show is. Simply a way of seeding one show to the next and of developing related themes. But that's just something I've kind of fallen into. I don't have to do work that way. And I don't use these artists in, I usually don't use them in more than 2 shows in a row.
Some of these artists friends?
Yes.
You don't feel a conflict of interest to show friends' work?
No, I'd feel the conflict of interest only if I were, only if I stood to benefit financially from their success. And since I don't I don't collect art per se. Occasionally, I'll be given a small piece by a friend, or accept a small piece as, say, partial payment for something that a friend can't otherwise pay for in my usual rates. But no, I don't feel a conflict of interest simply. It's not doing somebody a favor. It's being familiar with their work and wanting to contextualize that work, or provide them the kind of attention that I may feel that they deserve and aren't getting otherwise.
Do you feel like you have to understand what's going on in the art technically to be able to pass judgment on it aesthetically?
No, I don't, because I'd like to think of myself as the audience, not if I have technical awareness, that may assist me, and if I feel that the technical issues are significant to the production of the work and the meaning of the work, I'll make sure I familiarize myself with those technical means to the extent that I need to be aware of them. But I don't feel that that technical awareness is crucial to my understanding. After all, it's not to a non-professional. It's not to a it's not to a great part of my audience. And the rest of my audience can fill in the blanks themselves. Got it? You there?
Yep, I'm thinking.
Okay.
All right, I'm trying to, I mean, this is a group of artists we're talking with, Peter. I'm trying to anticipate their questions and try and make more transparent, you know, how art critics, you know, view their job and work with artists and art. And I would think that most of what you've said so far is pretty common, right? In terms of how critics approach their work and how they get paid, and their relationships with artists and galleries and or private entities.
You mean that this is typical? I think it's
Sufficiently.
I think so
too. Yeah. All right, you guys, who wants to ask a question to Peter? Make it a hard one. Nobody? You guys, come on. Are we all melting here in Chicago? Hot.
I'm not in Chicago.
Okay, so Ken, ask the question.
Yes, Peter. I'm curious about when it can click for an artist. When a critic feels that it's time to report on an artist, do many critics see themselves as the discoverers of new artists, or are they more comfortable with artists who already have somehow gotten some notoriety or represented at significant galleries?
That depends on the critic and his or her level of comfort with precisely that kind of thing. I'm concerned with both. I'm not concerned with making big reputations out of out of people whose MFAs or BFAs are still wet. And in fact, I do have a certain bias towards mid-career artists whom I feel have been passed over. I think it's the historian in me that leads me to that impulse. But other critics, particularly younger ones, may feel more comfortable bringing to the fore younger artists. And I think if all critics tended one way or the other, the discourse would bog down in a kind of a one-sided frenzy. I think that if we pay too much attention to young artists at the expense of older ones, then we're falling prey to trends, and also to the market preference for buying low, young, and selling high, old. By the same token, if we overemphasize or look entirely at older artists, then not only does that discourage younger artists, but it forces the weight of history on our perspective. We need to have access to the weight of history, but not be oppressed by it.
Thank you.
Sure.
How has the role of an art critic changed, Peter, in the last decade or so, and why?
I'm not sure how it's changed in the last decade or so. It certainly changed in the last half century. I don't think critics earn. I don't think there's a critical discourse that is central to the artistic discourse in the country the way there was in the 1950s, and less so, but still significantly in the 60s.
Is that good or bad?
I'd say more bad than good. Because the process of critical advocacy and the process of non-advocacy analysis is generally very worthwhile and serves to be kind of today's tomorrow's art history today.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it's very confining and puts people into like one or two camps, doesn't it?
It can, and that's why I don't completely regret it's the diminution of the power of art critics. That when given that power, not only art critics but any sort of determiners of the discourse can be polarizing and can create what are effectively artificial circumstances, artificial boundaries to the discourse. I find that the attention paid to what I write and the deference shown me as a result is on a personal level and probably on a professional level satisfying. There are other critics whom I think are given perhaps more credence than they deserve, and yet still others less. And I do find that with the internet, and that's where things have changed in the last decade. With the internet, there's more access people have to critics, and more access critics have to their readers.
Yeah.
So in that respect, perhaps the critical voice does play a greater role all over than it used to.
Well, hasn't that also changed criticism? I mean, I don't think there's as many reviews as there used to be. Do you?
I'll bet that purely numerically, there are more reviews than there used to be, but fewer people paying attention to them. And they're probably not written. Well, they're not written as conscientiously. Which is not to say that overall they're not written conscientiously, but reviewing isn't viewed with isn't valued the same way as it used to be. It seems to me, it's perhaps viewed more than it was 20 years ago, but 40, 50 years ago, it was viewed as something very valuable. Well, I think it has to do with a certain confusion, not a thoroughgoing confusion, but a certain conflation of visual art as part of a greater available entertainment.
You think visual art's more visible for more people than it used to be?
Yes, and that too is a double-edged sword.
I haven't even thought about it. So you think there's more? You're not necessarily saying this, but you think more people are going to museums than there ever have been?
Arguably. And are they seeking? But I'm not talking about what people are doing, but what their media are telling them.
Right.
And there's a greater acceptance of contemporary visual art activity in the media than there used to be, but there's a greater regard for it as a form of entertainment and less as a form of social discourse, an aesthetic discourse especially, than there used to be.
Would you therefore say that art being made today is more shallow?
Not necessarily. Yes, perhaps that the art being paid attention to, being given the greatest attention in the mass media, is more shallow than the art being ignored, necessarily. But in a funny way, the internet provides us both aggravates this situation and provides relief from it, because the media, the communications available on the internet are more broadly oriented towards the absorption capacities of those accessing it. Whereas print and broadcast media impose their own formats, the limitations of their own formats on what's being communicated. Internet media are more flexible. I don't know how much we take advantage of that flexibility, but we certainly do to an extent that outstrips that provided by print media and broadcast media.
How does that affect what artists create?
I'm not sure how it does, because Some artists stick to more traditional formats. Some artists take advantage of new formats. Some artists speak to new audiences, and some artists speak to more traditionally determined audiences.
There's a bunch of art being made in the last decade that, for lack of a better term, a few of us refer to as feeble. We call it feeble, F-E-E-B-L-E, feeble.
Right. Okay.
My wife refers to it as dormitory art. You know, and I think of people like, I mean, there have been sub-themes that we talk about, but maybe like Karen Kalimnik's a good example of an artist who says she paints poorly on purpose. You know, Luke Toymans, I think, is another, and there are plenty. What do you make of that? You know, that where artists are not making art as good as they can, they're just making it sufficient. Or I had a curator tell me that it was a good thing because it made art more accessible to people who couldn't make art. What do you think?
I think that last exhibition, explanation is a crock. But I do think, but it's interesting because I've seen, now that I understand what you mean by feeble art, I've seen a lot of feeble art that is strong precisely because it is feeble. I've seen a lot of feeble art that thinks it's strong because it's feeble, but it's really feeble. I've seen a lot of feeble art that you know, it just kind of lowballs it and you know, comes in low across the plate and stays there. And I think it depends on the particular artist's ability to capitalize on the nature of the material, the nature of the expression, the nature of the aesthetic, the nature of the message. Luke Toymans has, I've seen a couple of large exhibitions that hold together. They made more sense as wholes than they did it as sums of parts. That's one thing that feeble art forces an artist to do, is to think expansively and make things hold together on a macro level, because on a micro level they're just falling apart.
I'm not convinced that Toyman succeeds at that. How about a different example? How about Paul McCarthy?
That's a very good example, although McCarthy's work is very, very work and material intensive. If we're talking about what might be construed as a feeble message.
Yeah, I think I am here, but that's not what I meant when I started.
Yeah. Well, that Paul's work is flings a lot of bullshit, but flings it very far. And the problem with work like Paul's is not the work itself, but how it's misunderstood by succeeding generations of artists who think it's an excuse to get away with something rather than a circumstance to pose oneself difficulties.
Okay. What do you guys all want to know about an art critic that you've never asked? We got Peter here willing to be honest. I guess we have Peter here being honest.
Exactly. Well, you know.
Hi, I have a question. My name is Lauren Brown. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Hi, Peter. Thank you.
Now I can't hear you anymore. Oh. We're freezing. Can you hear me?
That too. Let's hold on a minute and it'll probably all resolve itself.
Yeah. There you go.
Lauren, when you're ready, proceed.
You there?
Somebody else can ask a question if they want. We'll get back to Lauren. You guys are quiet tonight.
Well, one thing that goes back to talking about art 50 years ago and the role of a critic in the media and in society. As an artist, I feel that it's the intellectual life, that being an artist is partly an intellectual life. And I feel a lot of division about that now in our society and even among artists. And I didn't know if you wanted to address that at all, if I'm being clear. This is Kenbo. Thank you.
I say, yeah, I think you are being clear, and that intellectual life is something that I always hope is an aspect of someone's participation in the discourse. I don't think the intellectual life needs to remove one from an engagement with popular entertainment, with with either what's popular or what's with entertainment. But access to an intellectual level of discourse as well, not instead, but as well, seems to be crucial to maintaining one's the broad grasp one has, not simply of one's art and art making and viewing art, but of how one views life as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, because it also addresses why art is important to human society in the context that it has evolved to.
Mm-hmm. You can start by feeling your way through art, but if that's all you do, and all you're doing is getting off on art rather than getting into it.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. It can open up into the discourse on any subject, then, for society, for humans.
Exactly. You should approach art from every way possible, and allow it to speak to you on every level possible. Maybe that's Paul's problem with this feeble art, in that so often usually it seems to be speaking on rather base levels, and so often it actually is. But in fact, the best of it is inviting us to come down to its level and realize that there's a micro level of intellect that's also pertaining. That's with regard to the best ones, of course, but that's true in any artistic tendency.
As a critic, do you feel like you have to kind of dumb yourself down a little to today's audience, or you'll alienate people if you use certain words, or is that not an issue because one wants to communicate anyway?
I want to communicate, and I want to write as well as possible. If I feel the need to use big words, quote unquote, I'll use them in a way that will help readers who don't know them come to understand them without having to look them up. If they want to use a dictionary and look them up, that's great. But I came to understand all these words in the context of usage, reading art criticism and art history and novels and poems and that kind of thing. And I mean, there are a lot of we can learn a lot of vocabulary by reading Shakespeare. Well, I'm not Shakespeare, but I can use languages as well to pass on to my readers what the usage of certain words, the meaning of certain phrases, and I want to do it in a relatively artful way, so that people want to read me not simply for what I think, but for the way I think it.
That would help us with our art statements too, then. If we're using some difficult language, we want the sentence to define the word as we use it, in a sense.
Exactly, which means that the sentences have themselves to be inviting to read. In fact, I think, especially when you're writing an artist statement, you should have music in your ear. I write poetry, and I write poetry I write poetry from the point of view of somebody responding visually and somebody responding sonically. And I've come to bring that sensibility into my writing, into my art writing. Obviously, I'd be responding visually, but I also want my art writing to be something that can be attractive when read out loud.
Would you agree that philosophy in that way is really a genre of art, as much as maybe it's tried to be a science? It's really an art.
Philosophy? Philosophy is a form of art, and art is a form of philosophy. Where one ends and the other begins is at best hard to distinguish.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Lauren's back.
Lauren is back. Let's see if Lauren's capable. Go ahead, Lauren.
No, she got an X appeared next to her headphones.
Well, this is...
Hold on, Lauren. Go. You're unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Is this Lauren?
Yes, this is Lauren.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, so sorry about that earlier. I have no idea what happened. I'm on my desktop now. What sort of advice would you give to someone who's trying to not only make a name for themselves, but inspire people to not just make a difference with their work, but be known to people as, well, I'm an architectural photographer, and I think that my work is beyond myself. I'm addicted to my work, and I want people to also feel the same way. What advice would you give to someone who is, well, let's just say, trying to make a name for themselves? Do we reach out to you? Do we reach out to people? When do we know that people have seen us? My question's a little confusing. I'm so sorry. It's so hot in my room. I'm sweating.
No, I'm sorry. I'm speaking to you from the luxury of Southern California, where we're still having a relatively cool summer, and I hate to move. But I understand that. I was just in Italy, and it was pretty warm and humid. But then it was Italy. At any rate, how you get your work out? Find exhibition circumstances for your work. Even create them, whether they're display or publication or that kind of thing. You get the work out by showing it. Even if you have to invent the space, even if you have to, show the work. Decide the kinds of audiences you want to reach. Study how those audiences are attracted to what circumstances those audiences are attracted, and introduce yourself into those circumstances. Now, normally you'd expect those circumstances to be determined by directed by others, that you'd have little say in showing your work. But in fact, joining a co-op, creating a co-op, creating one-night spaces, one-night exhibition spaces, exhibiting in the context of dance clubs, that kind of thing. There are many ways of getting the work out. Pay attention. Hang out with friends who are trying to do the same thing.
Right. I think I know how to better ask my question. How do I impress art collectors such as yourself? Do I send you an email? Please don't just speak for yourself, but how do we make a great impression without saying Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Okay. I mean, you obviously have a website already, and if you don't, you should. That's your first move. Then you find ways of alerting people to that website, whether it's getting an emailing list by which you can send out you send out links that are also illustrated. You should have in your email blast a couple of images and a link to more. At the same time, you print up hard copy cards that you distribute in spaces, whether they're art spaces or, just restaurants or whatever, where people are going to pick them up and see reproductions of your work and be given a link that they can take home. Whether you'll be reaching audiences that are both professional and non-professional.
Okay. I had no idea that art critics were so influential. Forgive me.
So what?
Influential.
Art could be so influential?
No. Critics could be.
Oh, art critics could be so influential? Oh.
I did a little Google search online to see, how much influence critics have, but I didn't really realize it. I'm realizing my audience is growing every time I have a webinar. I'm realizing it's not just a few people. It's a lot of art critics, galleries, curators, having a partner and what that can do for your business. So, anyways, I'm going to email you and I'm going to say hello, and I will send you a link to my website. Thank you.
Okay. That's one way of doing it.
Yes.
Do you get inquiries, Peter, directly from artists who want you to see their show and write about it, etc.?
Yes. I expect that. At worst, I expect it. At best, I welcome it because it informs me about what's going on out there. And if I can see the TV show, I will. There's a lot of shows to see, and that's, right in my own backyard. And I have a reputation for getting out and about and seeing a lot of stuff. It's a reputation that I no longer deserve the way I used to. It's just circumstantially, but I do try to see as much as possible.
How are you usually informed? Via email?
Yes. Email is the way I prefer to be informed. If it's the email address I prefer for artists outside the Southern California area is my Verizon address, which is pfrankla@verizon.net. Artists in the Southern California area are invited to contact me through my Yahoo address, which I think you have. But pfrankla@verizon.net, I'm assuming that the bulk of your participants tonight are in the Chicago area.
Yes, but I think there are a couple from LA.
Okay.
pfrankla@verizon.net.
Yeah. If the LA people write to me there, I'll just give them the Yahoo address.
Yeah.
Also, I'll be able to go to their websites either immediately or after weeks when I take care of other work that I'm doing.
Are there critics that you see writing with a pretty singular voice and whose opinion you can comfortably quantify? I mean, I'm thinking, I guess, about Jed Pearl.
I think critics like that are in the minority. I don't think critics who work like that are valued the same way they were, or are given the same deference they were 40 years ago, say. This is not to diminish what Jed does, and in fact, the fact that he's a relative rarity anymore makes him that much more valuable. It's interesting.
What about someone? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Peter.
Jed and I went to Columbia together.
He's become more like this than he used to be, huh?
He's become more what?
He's become more the way he is. I don't know, more acerbic, more in left field than he used to be.
Right field.
Yes. Okay. Right field.
Which is not only his right, but it's useful as long as he's articulate, positively or negatively, about what he's observing and what he's expressing. You know, it's his ability to articulate his beliefs and his observations that's valuable to us. If you were just sitting there grousing or praising, and you weren't able to explain why and convince us in those explanations, then he'd be a boring curmudgeon. Well, he may be a curmudgeon, but he's not boring because he can articulate. And I want to achieve that level of articulation in my own writing, despite the fact that I approach art from a rather different point of view.
Do you seek out art critics to read?
No, but there are critics whom I like reading more than others because they write better.
Roberta Smith does a pretty good job.
Yes, and I've enjoyed watching her mature as a writer. Because when she first started out for the Times, she was a lot more awkward, and a lot more reliant on kind of critical gimmicks, and those are almost entirely absent from her writing at this point.
You know, I'm thinking about her and Jerry Saltz being married, and I'm wondering if most art critics are more not married than the rest of society. Do you think that more art critics are loners?
No. I know plenty of art critics who are happily married.
Okay.
I know more art critics who are happily married than I know art critics who are happy.
I don't know what to make of that statement.
I'm not sure what to make of it either. I will say I'm not married and I'm happy.
Yeah. What possessed you to move to L.A.?
Two things. L.A. and New York. I moved to L.A. in the late 80s because I was sitting in New York, missing New York. People ask me if I miss New York living here. I said I miss New York more when I was living there. Because the New York that I grew up in, the New York that provided me a sense of real discourse and of real community, dissolved in the 80s in the face of an onslaught of commercialism, careerist ambition, and putting bullshit before the horse. And I still find that in LA, I find that ideas and community are what drive the discourse here.
That's pretty exciting. So, early 80s. So you got to Los Angeles about the time it put itself on the map.
Yes. And shortly after that process had begun.
I have feelings about what happened and why that happened. What do you attribute it to?
In the 80s, I like to say both in LA and New York got worse, but only LA got better as well. That there was no support infrastructure to speak of here outside of the schools until the 80s, and then galleries and museums and the collectors, and that whole infrastructure fell into place. It's still got its problems, but it's mature now.
I thought it had a lot to do with Hollywood and people like Bob Geffen and Steve Martin getting involved in art and becoming cool to collect where it wasn't before.
But not only. Hollywood has never been, despite what people think, Hollywood has always been involved in the art scene here and never been its primary patron.
I guess you had, what, Vincent Price and Edward G. Robinson before. I just feel like it's more visible now.
It is, and Hollywood's participation is greater.
Yeah.
And also more sophisticated. Although the participation of people like Robinson and Price and what's the guy's name?
Cantor. Wiseman.
No, Cantor and Wiseman were in Hollywood.
No.
There was an actor who had a very distinctive voice. He did a lot of work with Disney, and he had a notable art collection.
I don't know who that is offhand.
I'm blanking. And he had a last name for a first name, and I'm just blanking on the name.
That's a good trivia question. I'm going to work on that one. I don't know the answer yet.
Exactly. Well, as soon as we sign off, I'll remember.
Well, maybe we're about done. Anybody else have questions?
I have one question. Do you ever find yourself looking for art that you don't have to be invested in for your work, meaning just going to enjoy it?
Yes. All the time. All the time. Especially historical art. One of the things that motivates me most is a curiosity about all the art thinking, all the art movements, all the artists who were active previous to our own time and who contributed to their time and place, but who have been all but forgotten since. You know, we're talking about geometric artists working in Argentina in the late 1940s, or Belgian Dadaists, or you know, futurists working in Poland, that kind of thing.
Are you putting together a compilation of these names of forgotten artists?
No, but if ever a compilation, it'd be a compilation I'd love to contribute to. Besides, it'd be massive. The compilations I seek out are those that update specific times and specific places. For instance, there was a big show at LACMA a few years ago of the Eastern European the pre-war Eastern European avant-garde. And then just recently, in anticipation of the Getty's PSC program, Lynn Kienholz compiled a kind of a dictionary of Southern California artists active before 1980. And it's a work in progress, obviously, but they all are. You know, contemporary artists are, as I said before, involved. We are all involved in tomorrow's art history today. And as part of that, I like to look at revisiting and reconsidering today's art history from yesterday. Lauren? Or are you on? Okay.
Yes?
Your image popped up, so I thought you had a question.
My image popped up.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, if I could.
Yeah.
One of them is, okay, so you gave us Roberta Smith and Jed Pearl. Do you have, who should I be reading? Like nationally, I already read Peter Schellgold and whoever shows up in the New York Times. Who should I be reading out of Los Angeles?
Out of Los Angeles? Besides me, Christopher Knight to a certain extent, Matt Gleason to a certain extent, anybody who writes for the Huffington Post. There are a number of good writers in Art Limited, Artillery Magazine. These are all publications I write for. Yeah. And I've been noticing that the writing is getting better and better.
Before artillery, you said art.
Limited, Art Ltd.
Sure, I've seen it.
Yeah.
All right. I can. And then I had another question about. Okay, I studied art history at NYU, and at that time, Robert Rosenblum would stand up and he'd talk about LA art or California art, and he'd sort of go and blow it off. How do you feel about how seriously the California-New York evaluation is at this point?
I always take all New York evaluations with a grain of salt because they're based on a centripetal model. If it's not in New York, it either isn't happening or it's less important. That's one reason I left New York, so I could get past it. Although I must say that one of the things, that my exposure to LA art began in New York with a relatively positive reception for art being made here in New York in the '60s. But it was always like, Bobby had a tendency to be funny about these things, but I'm sure there were artists out here that about whom he was really enthusiastic. Possibly David Hockney or again, there's something for everybody everywhere.
Okay, here's another one. How's LA doing? Last time I was down there, it was at the height of the recession, and it felt really strangled by the economic downturn. Do you feel like, how's it going?
Better.
Better. Well, the other thing was that artists up here, I'm in San Francisco, artists up here should not approach galleries in LA until they had stabilized in a way because they were busy taking care of their own.
You can almost say that that's true everywhere, all the time.
Okay.
Irrespective of where the gallery is based, if the gallery seems to be the kind of gallery you ought to be working, that is, it's showing the kind of work you make, and it's doing it in a good way, you ought to approach it whether it's in New York or Aspen or Munich or Hong Kong.
Okay. At the time, I was told it was a little like bringing your slides to a funeral, that it was rude, in fact.
Rude? Oh, I like that. I like that thought, but no.
Okay.
Good luck.
We'll see.
Right.
Oh, okay, here's the thing. How do you feel about sort of the little colony rising up? Like in Los Angeles in the last 10 years, I've seen the rise of Chinatown, Culver City, Bergamot Station, and in New York now the Lower East Side is rising up. How does that kind of gentrification geography shape the scope of an art count?
As it manifests community, it interests me. And it interests me as an aspect of the artistic discourse. Otherwise, it's just real estate.
Okay.
I mean, I like to say that when the East Village closed, that was my signal to leave New York. But not because the East Village was a neat place to hang out, but because it was the last manifestation of community among artists on a street level in New York. And after that, it was getting pushed back into Williamsburg, pushed back into Bushwick, pushed back into the South Bronx, and that was just annoying and inevitable.
Okay, well, thanks.
Sure. Anybody else?
That's what I want to know. Anybody else? I think Peter's given us a bunch of good information. I don't think our critics functions as much as a mystery as it used to be this morning. Or before Peter spoke.
Now it's more of a mystery to me, but that's how I like it. So, Paul,
Yes.
anything else?
No. I think this has been really good. Peter, did you enjoy this?
Quite a bit.
Oh, good. There are about 20 people in this group, and some of them have had, decent experience, and some have had, a lot, and some have had very little. And I appreciate all the input and the information and the guidelines. You guys, those of you who are in Chicago, we have a studio visit Thursday afternoon, a design studio, 2 o'clock, and I'll send you information about that tomorrow. Peter, I think this has been good. Let's wrap this thing up. Peter, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing yourself. Thank you for contributing a point of view from LA, and thank you for telling us about how art critics work. All you guys, thanks for attending tonight, and I'll see you all soon. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you too, Peter. Bye-bye. And everybody's now unmuted. Good night, all.
Bye.